the gospel is like the unique reality of Jesus and of God and his love for us that can actually change not only the goal of fighting in marriage, but also the means, like the way you fight is in light of the gospel. Welcome to Pastor the People. I'm Hunter Carter, and today I am joined with Becky, Scott Brown, and Carson Joyner. It's actually Becky Brown and Scott Brown, but yeah. I don't know why I missed your last name there.
Good to be with you, Hunter.
It's good to be back.
It's good to be here.
Great to be back, and hopefully we don't have some sort of conflict here, because that's what we're talking about today is conflict, fighting fair in your marriage. So that's kind of the topic for today. How do you guys feel about that?
Sounds like a harsh topic, but it's one that I think all of us can relate to.
Very needed.
And definitely, if you have never been married, you might be like, well, why do you have to do that? Maybe you don't have to fight in your marriage. And if you are married, you say, oh yeah, I understand why they're talking about that. So we're going to get into a little bit of why conflict is a reality in our marriage and kind of the theological underpinnings of that. When I was dating Marguerite, a mentor and a good friend of ours and an elder at our church told us, hey, when you get married, you're going to pick the person that you're going to fight with for the rest of your life. And I remember being like, oh.
What a way to word it.
Marriage, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
And I think that's turned out to be kind of true. Did you guys pre-marriage have any sage mentor tell you such words?
I mean, we talked about conflict resolution. You always do in a premarital conversation. So we knew that was going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know until you experience it.
Scott and Becky, did you guys talk with Carson and Casey before they were married, like about marriage? Was that?
Yeah.
Really?
For sure.
Wow.
Yeah. I did their premarital counseling.
Whoa.
And their wedding.
True. Yeah. I would say no one necessarily, I can't think of a specific conversation about conflict. I think at least I had a base understanding, but I know that that's a part of Casey and I's dating story it was actually resolving conflict that kind of like ratcheted our relationship up because we sort of had that first fight that doesn't feel great, you know? And that is kind of a scary moment when you are just merely dating someone. You're not tethered to this person, and now there's a conflict that really has hurt feelings. And it was actually my instinct when we had this fight was to take a step back. And in that instance, Casey's instinct was to really lean in. And it's a fun story, but she just showed up unannounced, like 15 minutes after we had this fight, like at my place. And it was like, because it was over the phone, or whatever. And just like seeing her at the door when I was like in full kind of like, oh, I don't know if this thing is going to make it. And then all of a sudden there she was and like came in and like leaned in and like we sat and had the conflict and talked it out. And for me, it was just it was a key moment for us. And I really do think it needs to be a key moment for anybody in a dating relationship to experience conflict, not just when the other person's at their best, but like over some seasons of life, and to understand how this person that you're considering marrying is going to resolve conflict. And for me, in that moment, Casey showing that her instinct was to lean in and to work through something and to move toward me was huge. And even in that moment, I had to admit I wasn't doing the same. So it was humbling, and it was also something I very much needed to see. So I feel like it was a big lesson we learned in the process of dating. And I think it's an important thing that everybody who's dating needs to experience before they decide whether to move forward with this person.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the primary reasons that we tell people in premarital counseling or premarital counseling is to not rush in getting married, to take some time, just because, in those early, it takes a few months oftentimes to get past sort of the infatuation stage until you actually have a kind of a conflict.
Yeah. See, it's funny, Marguerite and I, we were good friends for a couple of years before we got engaged. And then our engagement, we dated for like 5 months, engaged for 4, married in 9, but we knew each other for a couple of years beforehand. But still, we heard people say, I think even some counselors will say, like, go home and fight with your wife. Like, that's my advice to you. You're like, wow, is that really good advice? But we never had a big, like our first really big fight happened after we were married. but we were prepared for it because we had heard people talk about it. We had had a lot of conversations, but I guess we're one of those couples that didn't have, I think it's kind of a gift to be able to like have a real fight before marriage.
And that word is scary, like fighting with your spouse. That just seems like something you shouldn't do.
So we are talking about jujitsu, in case you're wondering.
No. And
I was about to say the same thing. That's an intense word, so we kind of want to define it, right?
Well, but I love, there is a scene of a show that I have watched in my life called The Office, where Jim and Pam, who love each other very much, had this whole arc in their relationship where they were fighting a lot. And I just remember really clearly when he said, I just don't think I should come home because all we're going to do is fight. And she said, I think you need to stay home and we need to fight. And it was just this, and I'd been married a long time when I heard that, but I thought that's great because it's fighting for something. It's not fighting against your spouse or fighting with your spouse. It's fighting for something. And Pam and her brilliance, or the brilliance of the writers, captured that. And I thought that was poignant.
That is poignant, yeah.
Very.
Do you want to say anything else, Scott, about defining fighting, like what we mean by that, before we get into why it's inevitable?
It's certainly not like physical fighting or like, we mean like the common arguing, frustrations, conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it really starts in the Bible early. So maybe starting with like the theology of why this is inevitable, just to make sure we sort of like, check that box and square that away is, I mean, early in the Bible, you see the first married couple. They were naked, not ashamed. That's end of Genesis 2. And then Genesis 3 comes along, right? And there's the serpent. And what's interesting is there seems to be no conflict even with the serpent, right? It's like the woman takes the fruit, she gives it to her husband, he eats it. It's like no conflict. But the moment they eat the fruit, it says their eyes were opened. They knew that they were naked. And then, of course, God appears, and there's this whole blame game that happens. It's, I forget the order at the moment, but it's the woman says, "Oh no, I didn't do it. The snake made me do it." And then God says to the man, "Like, what about you?" He's like, "Oh no, it's the woman you gave me." Yeah, I think actually it was Adam he talks to first, but still, there's conflict. And then in Genesis 3, I don't have the verse in front of me, but there is essentially he curses the snake. He does not curse Adam and Eve, but he does guarantee something. He tells the woman, right, your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And just theologically, that's freighted language because that desire for your husband is the same word that's used in Genesis 4 with Cain and Abel when God says to Cain, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, and you must rule over it. So on one hand, there's this kind of, it's not just like your wife is going to think you're like really attractive, like your desire shall be for your husband. It's more like there's a power struggle. And then the word used for husband, he shall rule over you. It's like, that's not how God intended it to be. Like, in the sense of man and woman are equal in scripture. Eve is taken from Adam's side, not his head, not his foot. And they're supposed to rule and have dominion over creation, but not over each other. So it's sort of like God is basically saying, welcome to marriage this side of the fall. Like there will be conflict now. And obviously if you have been married, then this should not come as a surprise to you. Theologically speaking, because we live in a fallen world, because there is a real personal devil, and because we are all sinful people, there's no way to escape it, right?
In any human relationship, right?
Right.
Any work relationships, every single human relationship will involve conflict, disappointment, sadness, need for repair, forgiveness.
Yeah.
But
the unique thing about marriage is it's the most intimate, important,
and tender into which human hearts can enter.
Totally.
So holy is it that only death should break its holy bonds.
What is that, Scott?
It's just dropping knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, you quoting a hymn or something, or?
That's part of the marriage ceremony. That would be the
marriage ceremony. And since you're such a novice ordinand, perhaps you're not as aware.
I might be using some sort of pagan marriage ceremony.
I doubt that. Every marriage that you see, no matter who they are, how long they've been married, how great it looks like they've got it, there is conflict in that marriage. And So you never have to wonder, I wonder if they fight every now and then or have conflict.
Right.
Answer is yes.
Yeah.
Always.
And being a Christian does not baptize you out of it. So it's not just like, oh, if you come to Christ, then you won't have conflict. It's like,
So I guess we're speaking, anybody who's married knows this already, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, we're speaking to people who are thinking about marriage or getting serious about dating relationships, that kind of thing. You just need to know, don't be freaked out by conflict and difficulty and trial in a dating relationship or a marriage relationship. Like, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
The real question is exactly what Carson was just after in the story about he and Casey, is that the question is, how do you, not just individually, but like as a unit, as a couple, how are you at working through these things?
Yeah.
And so,
and I would say this. So the goal, right, is not to have the total absence of all conflict in your marriage, but to have the presence of healthy and constructive conflict in your marriage.
Absolutely.
It's like, if your goal was just, we want to erase the conflict, then, that's a white whale, right? Moby Dick, like that's chasing after the wind. I don't have a better metaphor on hand, but that it's not going to work, right? That's futility. The goal is like acknowledging conflict is inevitable, but there are kinds of conflict. It's unhealthy conflict, destructive conflict, spiraling conflict, and then there can be actually healthy conflict, constructive, and maybe even conflict that can kind of prune your marriage and lead to flourishing.
I once had a conversation with a couple, and they were not young, and they were wanting to help out in the church and help other couples, that kind of thing. And they said, the funny thing about us is we've never had a fight in our marriage. I go, never. And they said, no, we've never. And I go, okay. And I didn't get into it with them. I didn't start a fight over their lack of fighting, but I kind of walked away going, I don't know what good you can do for other couples then, because if you won't even recognize that you've had conflict,
That's a red flag.
that's a bit of a red flag. So yeah, it's
And
yes,
yet,
it's so
when-
inevitable.
When people listen to this or see that this is the podcast that's being dropped, I don't want them to go, oh, well, conflict. I definitely don't want to talk about that. That sounds horrible. But to look at it with this attitude of, this is just a natural part of life. How great to be able to discuss it with one another, to have, different ground rules, so to speak, or ways that are going to make it something that is happening. Like, you're together, this is coming, and you can work together.
Yeah,
Totally.
well, Scott, you mentioned the relationships in Genesis, or maybe Hunter, you mentioned that, and it's like, I love thinking you can approach Genesis through so many different lenses, and through relationship is one of them. And in the beginning, you see God creating all of these relationships: relationship between Himself and His creation, relationship with the creation to the creation, and relationship. One of the ones I like to think of is man to himself. And when sin enters, it's breaking all of those relationships. So we kind of already said this, but I do think even the relationship with yourself is broken in the fall. And so another way to think about conflict is, instead of, if that's just too negative a word for some people, it's more like the reality of brokenness in every relationship as a result of sin. And as a Christian, if you actually want to grow and be sanctified, you have to understand that God's promises and His Spirit are going to continue to work with us throughout the course of our life and sanctify us more and more into the image of Christ. In other words, it's addressing the brokenness in our own relationship with God and in our own relationship with ourselves and others. And you ought to want that in your relationship. And it's inevitable that you and your spouse, who's also broken, are going to be being separately sanctified by the Spirit, but literally it's the purpose of marriage to help sanctify one another. That relationship is this conduit for which God helps to shape us and conform us. And so avoiding conflict or assuming there will be none is actually, I think, a denial of just the reality of what it is to walk and pursue Christ and be sanctified.
Totally. Yeah. You, Carson, you always do this. Drop amazing knowledge, but you
said.
You triggered something in my brain, and I wrote it down, and I'll see if I'll come back to it at the end, because there's a better place for it. But that's a really insightful. So I want to. I kind of put two segments together here, which just are two tools. That's all these are, that were useful to me and Marguerite in our marriage, and we've shared with some other people. And so the first one is called what we call the Geneva Convention. Every marriage needs to have some rules of engagement. So my elder mentor friend I was talking about said to us, you and Marguerite need to sit down and you need to have a Geneva Convention. And what he meant was like, you need to talk about, here are the rules. And when we fight, because it's inevitable, do this, by the way, not when you're fighting, but in like a sober and cool moment when you're at peace. Say, hey, you know how we fight all the time, or we're bound to fight inevitably? What if we just set some ground rules that we can both agree to, and maybe even write them down? But Marguerite and I did that very early in our marriage, actually before we ever had this first major fight, and we used the Geneva Convention for the fight. And some of the things that we agreed on, just to like make it kind of put some meat on the bones here, is one of the things we said was, we're not going to raise our voices at each other. We're not going to try to shout each other out of the room. We're not going to yell, okay? So that's part of our Geneva Convention. Another was, we aren't going to use the words never and always. Another was, as much as we can, we're going to try to use I language and not you language, right? And so it's, instead of saying, you did this, you do this, it's more, this is how I'm feeling, when this happens, it makes me feel this way. And that's a very practical thing. You don't even have to be a Christian to use that. I think it's just general wisdom of, we're going to have emotions, riding hot. Is there a way that we can just agree to use these? And what that's done in our marriage, and even in some fights, is when you violate the Geneva Convention, suddenly your partner smiles at you and says, you just said the word never.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, well, I lost, right? I lost. Okay, hang on one second. I didn't mean never. What I meant was, and it kind of grounds it, So what do you guys think about this?
This is huge. It's super important. Becky and I, right after we got married, I don't know if you remember this time, you and I took a seminary class together, and it was about this very thing. It was like communication in marriage, basically. And they went over all this stuff, and we had just gotten married. It was super helpful. So we did our stuff didn't come as much in premarital as it did in having been married and taking this class together, and it was so good. They mentioned the avoid the always and never language, and it's so important because I've noticed this in every conflict I've ever been in. As soon as someone says, you never do this or you always do this, all I have to do is give them one instance, and then I've, see, that one time, like big deal,
And I do that. I totally do that. I look for the break in what you've said is truth.
Do you always do that, Becky?
She always does that. And so
I will. Find
it's superlatives that don't make it. It's not good communication of any sort. And then the I language versus you language is super important. Also, it's like, rather than like you do this and you stink and you're falling short or you're the problem, it kind of insinuates like, hey, when you said that, this is how I was feeling. It's not that you cannot literally say the word you, right, but it's like, hey, here's how I'm interpreting that. This is how I'm feeling. This is how I'm processing it. And so it's more the focus of the conversation is on you and your reaction to what's happening versus like, you did this and you're the problem and,
Oh, I just remembered another, which we haven't used in a while, and maybe that's because we're fighting poorly right now in our fights. But one thing that we used to do more early in marriage, probably we had less kids and we're better rested. But another trick we had learned was like, whenever your spouse articulates how they're feeling or what they think the problem is, I kind of identifying the problem, is to try to restate what they said in a way that is agreeable to them. So it's like,
steel man their argument.
Yeah. So, so what you're trying to say is you feel hurt because I did this and it made you feel this way. And that's why you think this.
Yeah.
And is that fair? And then let them respond, So before you kind of weigh in with your piece, it's really make sure that you have said what your spouse is trying to say to their satisfaction, right? And just say, hey, before I tell you kind of how I'm feeling about this, like, I really want to make sure I'm understanding you. Is this what you're saying? Like, that kind of stuff is also helpful.
Again, this is just great human communication 101. But
with any relationship.
So if that's true in any relationship, this needs to be the case this much more in marriage, because I think we take for granted the people that are most close to us, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Especially our spouses.
And we talked about it before in previous episodes. Just your tone is really important, and the verse, "A soft answer does turn away wrath." When you're fighting, it's because there's something that you're both feeling really either hurt about, or really strongly about, or really frustrated regarding, and so voices get louder. Maybe even word choice that you use is not kind. And they say everything we learn in kindergarten about being kind and using nice words. And when you are really, really amped up, it's so hard to de-escalate with your tone or with even your volume and the words that you say. But if you have any chance of truly hearing one another, someone has to de-escalate and not let it get out of control with shouting or really bad character, throwing things about people's character around and being cruel.
Yeah. We're not going to curse at one another. We're not going to yell. We're not going to throw things. We're going to try to calmly talk through it and watch our tone. And by the way, like in some of our arguments, like our tone has not been, our voices have been raised. We have had, Becky has a look and like I can tell, I know when I'm in real trouble, you know what I mean?
But also this goes back to the other episodes where we talked about forgiving your spouse, right? And like the goal, just to like all of my really legalistic types out there, older brother Pharisee types, it's like, you're gonna fight in your marriage. Also, you're gonna fight unfair at times. Like none of us do this perfectly, right? So it's like it's like the goal is not to, if I had a perfect marriage, then I'd never have a bad fight. It's like we all have bad fights. We even have histories and we have rhythms of bad fights. And so it's to just have the humility. I mean, it's the fruit of the Spirit. You know, it's patience, it's kindness, it's gentleness, it's self-control. I mean, those are the things we need. And one of the things you said, Scott, I think is really profound was we can take for granted those relationships that are closest to us, because when you're at home, you know, like Scott, like you're my boss, right? And my friend and co-laborer, all that stuff. Mainly boss. Okay. Well, no. Just learned that. I just got boss zoned or employee zoned. Boss zoned. But the truth is, like, I mean, all four of us, except the two of you, it's like we have, like, in a way, you have sort of a reputation or something or an image with people that are not living in your house, right? But your kids and your spouse, it's like there's no image, right? It's like they know the real you.
They know you.
And that kind of comfortability, which is good and right, might lead you to take how you talk to your spouse for granted and just say, well, I'm just being myself. It's like, well, maybe if you're kind to your spouse, even when it feels like you're stepping into it and it's not just authentic or natural, it's like, well, maybe you actually need to have something supernatural, not just natural in your home, right? Like, so I would just caution people to say, like, and I'm kind of preaching to myself here, but it's like, let's not take the people closest to us for granted and treat them worse than everyone else in our life.
But I think we can be tempted to be like, we've made vows to one another. I know she's not going anywhere. Like, you don't have to work at New Valley. I don't even have to. You know, we could leave. We could break off our relationship. We don't have a covenant together, right? But she and I have a covenant together. And so there's the sense in which Christians, if they're not careful, can be tempted to be like, well, we're not getting divorced, so
a false security,
a false sense of security. So I can treat you this way. I can raise my voice. I can use all the hyperbole that I want. And it's really unhelpful. At the end of the day, I think you have to ask yourself, like, am I doing everything I can? And I think this is important. And I do talk to people about this before they get married, is like, do everything in your power to make the vows that you say during your ceremony easier to keep. They're never easy, but like, are you doing all that you can to make to love you in sickness and in health, and to
make it easy for your spouse to keep?
Yes. Like, am I living in such a way that it's not a burden for you to keep the vows that you and I took to one another?
Right.
That's good.
This is really great. A couple that I know that we've all experienced that haven't been maybe said is like, avoiding character attacks has been really huge, and then like weaponizing like the past, or kind of tacking on additional issues into a conversation, like sort of an omnibus type of view. Like, omnibus may be helpful when you're at like a presbytery meeting and you're like trying to like batch deal
bundle
with things.
Would be like maybe
but in a marital fight, not so great. And, a couple things that have helped me specifically with some of those, I feel like both of those, like avoiding character attack and weaponizing the past, both of them kind of get at how successfully have you dealt with a problem over time? And if you have not dealt with a particular conflict well over time, and there has sort of been a residual buildup, it is going to make it that much easier to start assuming character problems. And it's going to be that much easier to begin to weaponize previous conflict, because in reality, what you're discovering, I think, if you're seeing your own heart doing that, or if you see your spouse doing it to you, you're discovering that this issue is actually not fully resolved because it keeps coming up, even when it should not. And so it's a good rule to not have it come up, but when it does come up, it's an insight. And I think what has really helped with that is, obviously believing that you and your spouse are on the same team, and you have a commitment to believe the best about them, to believe the best character about them. And then secondly, something that's been very helpful to me is just if as a Christian, you have had to come to Christ in the first place, you have to first admit this incapacity to save yourself. You've had to be humbled and brought low to realize, like, I've got a problem. I have all manner of sinfulness and selfishness going on in me. And you have had to come to God and say, I have nothing. And then what you find in the good news of the gospel is that before a holy God, because of what Christ has done for you, you are cloaked in his righteousness and you stand justified before God. And so Paul uses this like heavy courtroom language consistently to help us understand what justification means. Literally paints a picture for us where we are to envision ourselves like standing before the court of God and we're declared just. So if you can believe, if you have been that humbled and you understand that you have that profound of a sin problem, and if you believe that you stand justified before God, it ought to help us to quickly own up to problems with our spouse, and it ought to free us to be able to own, even if I literally didn't do what I'm being told I did in this instance, I am absolutely capable of this, or I have failed on some level where I could have communicated that this is what I was doing. And it should, we're nothing's at risk. We're literally okay. We're justified before God. So we should be able to own up to those things. So anyway, if you are choosing to believe that about your spouse, the best thing, and if you believe that you stand just before God, it should really, really help us to do a good job of repenting. We're obviously called to do a good job of forgiving. And so therefore, we shouldn't, hopefully, if we're doing a good job of resolving conflict over time in our marriages, we shouldn't have this lingering temptation to bring up the past and continue to recycle arguments, because those things have, in a sense, been wiped clean. That's almost the goal, is to have a feeling of like a clean slate with your spouse because you've done such a good job apologizing and they've done such a good job forgiving, or vice versa.
That is so good, man.
Yeah. When you're for one another, that when you're humble enough to accept that when somebody brings something to you, that you can own what part you have. There's almost always, if your partner is frustrated with you, if your spouse is frustrated or hurt by you, there's probably something that you can own in that. And so to be able to do that first and to show them, I'm willing to look at this and see what I own before then I respond back. And also just a timing. Timing is huge for us in terms of, because like when something comes up, maybe it just needs to be talked about right then. But for me, especially, I sometimes just need time. And I know that he needs time. Like, on a Sunday afternoon after you've preached, that is not a great time to have conflict. Right before you're going to go on a date, maybe is not the best time. So timing is also important.
Yeah, I just was going to say, no one is going to like admitting they're wrong. Like no one is going to like that. But I also feel like there's this aspect where it can be very freeing to just own up and admit to potential wrong, even if you haven't literally done the thing. It's like you're trying to justify yourself to your spouse. You're like holding up this like thing of like, I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that. And there is sometimes a freedom. It's like a muscle that you can almost experience working, of just being able to go, I am totally capable of doing that. And I might want to push back in something and say, I didn't actually do it this time. But like the more times you do that, it's not like that's enjoyable, but you get this sense of freedom. Like you're not keeping up some presentation of how great you are. You're able to quickly go, okay, yeah, I'm totally capable of this, or I did it. Yeah. and I'm so sorry. And that weightlessness, that freedom that comes from that can be actually something I think that has an enjoyment to it.
And part of that, that can help de-escalate, when you're willing to come in and go, there's two of us here. So
Yeah.
We're about to get into the next probably phase of this, but I do think it's important to define kind of what the win is. Like we just mentioned it a second ago, but like in marriage counseling, when I'm counseling with folks, I will often say like, you can't, when in conflict, especially in marriage, there is no win if only you are winning, because the marriage, if I've said this to so many people, you can win the battle and lose the war. It's like, what does it mean if you're right and your spouse is wrong and you prove it to them? Like, does that win the war? If the war is what? If the war is you being in love with one another, understanding one another, moving towards one another, caring for one another, if that's the war, your marriage is the war, then okay, so what? You proved some particular point to your spouse and made them feel less than. You've lost. You're losing the war. If you're tearing down your spouse to win as an individual, you're no longer an individual, right? Genesis and Jesus both say that we are one flesh. And so you're fighting for your marriage, not just for your own point of view, your own sense of right and wrong in the situation.
Totally. Yeah, that's really good and well said. And I have said before, I think we've all said it, but sin makes us stupid.
Yeah.
And that what we mean is sin is a delusion, and all sin really leads to, if you feed it, it leads to a Messiah complex, and you start to think, I deserve this, I'm entitled to this, and I'm perfectly righteous. And it's like, what the gospel actually does is it's a cure, right? And so it's hard to even talk about some of these tools without just getting into the gospel, because we know that the tools are just that. They're just tools. But the gospel's the power.
So if somebody hasn't done this yet, it'd probably be really wise to sit down, maybe before you're in, not while you're having a fight, but say, hey, we have conflict. Can we agree on, maybe after listening to this podcast or going to a marriage gathering that we have, like talking about like what is going to be our Geneva Convention? What are our rules of engagement?
And maybe a humble way to start that is to say, hey, I listened to this and I'd really like to know, when we fight, like what would really serve you?
Yeah.
Right? Like what are the rules that you would want to have as we fight? Is there anything I'm doing, and I'm sure there is, that's hurting you that I could change, right? That'd be a great way to start. So good word, Scott. So I do want to move us to this next segment, which is, again, just a tool, something that helped me. And this one might be a little goofy, but actually when I was teaching English in Hong Kong, I just wanted to say that. We had this training because we were on teams, and it was called care fronting. And we each took a test and we learned our conflict animal. Okay. And I know this is a little goofy, but bear with me. And remember what Scott said, that actually, because of the gospel, if you want a healthy marriage, the goal is not winning or losing. Okay. The goal is love, reconciliation. So in saying the types of conflict animals, there is no perfect animal, but let me get into it. So the general idea is this: we all have by default, whether it's because of our family of origin, nature or nurture, we have a kind of conflict style. And these can be represented by sundry animals. For instance, there are sharks, and sharks are, I win, you lose. And so this is how this works. They might have grown up in a family of origin, those are very combative or something like that. But when a fight starts, what happens for a shark person is they know how to go on the offensive. They're like, I'm going to tell you, they know how to win the high ground, to use a Star Wars analogy, very quickly. Okay, so there's a shark, I win, you lose. The opposite would be a teddy bear, which is you win, I lose. The teddy bear is soft and cuddly, and they will do anything to just be soft and cuddly. So, a shark with a teddy bear could be a dangerous combination because there might not be a lot of conflict. It might just start and stop real fast. A teddy bear just capitulates. Then there's a turtle, and that is you lose, I lose. Everyone loses. I'm just going to retreat, avoid conflict altogether. The owl would be the opposite, which is win-win. So we're fighting, and this person might have a little bit more emotional maturity or what have you. They just might have had a very balanced or level family, but hey, let's talk about this. Like, how can you win and how can I win? And then finally is the fox. And now this one's very wily and dangerous, but there is a kind of person who doesn't treat conflict seriously. It's like a game. Nobody wins, nobody loses. It's just we're having conflict, but none of it really matters. And for them, it's just, they like to play the side. And it's like, well, I didn't really feel that way. I just thought that I would start, what it is to know, okay, just by nature, by disposition, whatever, I come into a marriage with a certain view of conflict, and I'm either more comfortable with it or less comfortable with it, or I have patterns in my
being self-aware.
And so the goal of this is not to say, okay, try to figure out which animal are you, and then get deep into some sort of weird, Enneagram, spiral. It's not about the tool; it's about your spouse. And so, at the end of the day, anything we say on the podcast, besides gospel and Bible, which is not debatable, but any advice we have, it's really not for you to become some sort of marriage expert detached from the actual human you're married to. The goal is to say, hey, I want to understand my spouse better. And do you feel like this describes you? Do you feel like this describes me? And to have a conversation and engage over it. So yeah, I want to keep us moving and maybe get to a point where we can really get back to the gospel and how the gospel changes everything. So that'll be kind of the final part here. But anything else you guys want to say just on knowing yourself? And
I think the big thing is this, and Carson, you can jump in here too, but it's like, do you avoid conflict, or are you okay moving towards conflict? But if you are, like, I am more one who would move towards it. Becky is one who would move more away from it. But the question on both sides should be, are you doing it in a healthy way? So if I'm not a horrible shark usually, I think Becky and I have kind of said, this is going to sound kind of self-serving maybe, but at this point in our lives, in our marriage, we operate more like the owl. We're trying to find the win for one another, and we try to work through conflict well. But I am probably the one who's like, I'm upset, I want to talk about it. She's going to stew on it a little bit more. I think that is the question to ask, is like, what's your bent? What is my bent, and do I go about it in a healthy way?
Well, and back to something you said earlier, which is that someone comes to you and says, we've never had a fight in our marriage. This is the part where you say, well, you might be a teddy bear and you might be a turtle, right?
Right.
And that might be why you've never had a fight. But maybe your marriage is lacking something that if you could learn to work through conflict, you would have on the other side of it, right? So,
or maybe they just are defining it all different. I just cannot fathom a human relationship where there's just no
conflict.
No conflict.
Yeah. Carson, any final thought here before we go?
Yeah, I think it's just hard to overstate the importance of self-awareness. And I feel like a lot of these tools, this one included, like your conflict animal, is a good, like, kind of, not to be insulting about it, it is very helpful, but it's kind of like a 1.0 self-awareness tool. And a broad strokes, what is your relationship to conflict? Understanding your past, where you're coming from, how you tend to operate, I think is just really good. The truth is that your marriage is probably going to have 2.0 and 3.0 and beyond layers of problems when it comes to conflict, and you're going to need to delve into those as well. But I think that these resources are helpful to get the ball rolling and to get you starting to think about what your relationship is. Yeah. So I was thinking about, like, some of the fights that Casey and I have commonly had. I was trying to run it through that framework and be like, is one of us being a shark and the other one's being a fox, and what is it? And it kind of didn't really seem to fit. And so I kind of had to really poke and prod and ask some questions of Casey and ask some questions of the internet. And what I got to was interesting. It's like totally different category than this, so take it for what it's worth. But it was in conflict. Casey and I think, have a totally different function of language in the conflict. And the way that I tend to deal with words and with communication in conflict is using them as sort of surgical precision instruments. And it's coming from my place of really wanting to accurately figure out what has gone wrong, accurately describe what is happening right in this moment, what are we feeling, and then climb out of the conflict and get back to a place of health. And Casey's use of language, and this isn't completely true, it's just like these are generalities, but it's like she tends to use languages as sort of vehicles for communicating the emotional freight of what she's experiencing. And sometimes in my approach to language in that moment, it feels like there's a lack of precision, and that drives me crazy. And in her approach to language, my precision feels like it is lacking a capturing of the emotional freight she's trying to communicate. And so I don't know what animal that is, but that's like, that's a 2.0, that's like a 2.0 layer of problem that we have had to deal with. And it is just like missing each other completely. Like she will say something that is very emotionally freighted. And the very first thing that strikes me is like, well, there's inaccuracies in there. Like what you just said is not true, or I didn't do that, or I don't always do that, or whatever the case it may be. And we miss each other for however long, sometimes hours, before we're able to come back to what was meant to be said. And so, anyway, that has been an area that we've learned, and I think we both need to hear something. So maybe this resonates with someone who's listening, but here are some things that I feel like I need to hear as like a precision communicator, is that yes, precision matters, but like we have said, it's not the highest value. Like you're not winning a battle. There's a war to be fought, and it's a war for your holiness and your sanctity and the peace of your marriage. And so, yes, it matters. Also, like precision requires a lot of skill, and none of us are equally skilled in communication. So it's like, if you use precision as a measure, you can so easily kind of crush and offend your spouse with that. So that's not good. So don't let your precision become a weapon or an impossible standard for your spouse. And their emotional experience really, really matters. Regardless of how well it's communicated, you should become a student of that. And figure out what is being said. For the emotionally freighted communicator, if that's the thing to call it, it's like emotions matter, but they should not trump the need for precise communication and playing by the rules. Like you can't, because you're feeling a lot, does not give you a free pass to not play by the Geneva Convention rules, you know? And the more emotional spouse doesn't automatically get to win the argument. That's not fair to the person who in that moment is perhaps less emotional, that they just lose as a result of the heightened emotional state. And so similarly, don't let your emotions become a weapon or an excuse for unfair fighting. Precise communication matters and is actually the best way to communicate emotions. And so it should be something that you should be striving for. So there you go. There's like a 2.0, 3.0 level of thing. And all of it points back to it's self-awareness. It's becoming a student of your spouse. And it is trying to then get to the point where the gospel actually provides the good stuff.
Yeah, that's so great, Carson. And I think at this point, it's probably appropriate to just go all the way, like be very explicit and talk about the gospel itself, because all the tools, all the knowledge, it doesn't work. It's like a train on a track, like with no coal or whatever makes a train run, I guess. It's like, it's a car without gasoline. The gospel is the power that actually makes what we're doing in this podcast not just like a self-help thing. The gospel is like the unique reality of Jesus and of God and his love for us that can actually change not only the goal of fighting in marriage, but also the means, like the way you fight is in light of the gospel. You know, so just a couple passages to throw at us. One would be Ephesians 6:12, which says, "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood." Although when you're married, you feel like you do wrestle against flesh and blood. You're like, that's exactly what I'm doing. It's like, but the verse goes on, but against principalities and powers, right? And recognizing that we do have a real enemy, and it is not your spouse. That there's nothing Satan would love more than to destroy marriages, and he does it all the time. And so sort of stepping back, something else one of my mentors said is like, sometimes you take a pillow, you throw it across the room and you point at it and say like, I'm not actually mad at you. I'm mad at that pillow. I'm mad at this thing that's it's attacking our marriage. And I want us to get through this together. Like, how can we, yes, I know we're fighting, but we both want the same thing, right? Like we want a healthy marriage.
Yeah. You know, Carson said something earlier that's so key. It's that in order just to even become a Christian, you have to admit before a holy God that you have an infinite debt, right? That I could never, ever, ever save myself, that my debt against you is an infinite one. It's required the Son of God to die for me. So then why in turn can I not, in my human relationships, but especially with my wife, admit, yes, at least generally, forget the specific instance. Generally speaking, he said this earlier, of course I'm capable for this thing that you're saying I'm doing. Even if I didn't do it in this instance, I'm 100% capable of it. And it's just like we need that resource in every human relationship, that gospel humility that says, I really am that bad. But the good news is that good that I'm loved and accepted. So on the one hand, the gospel gives you this resource to be really humble in all your relationships, that I really am a sinner and it's that bad and I deserve death, spiritual, emotional, separation from God for eternity. That's what I deserve. But it's a resource in the opposite direction as well. It's that I am loved, forgiven, accepted, redeemed, and have a glorious future. And if all that's true, then I can bring a hope into my marriage and you need that hope, because the reality is this: you're both broken, fallen, and sinful, and you both you're going to hurt one another, and you got to learn to forgive one another. And the only way to do conflict well is to have a predisposition towards one another that's actually positive. You have to be good faith actors. You have to want the best for the other. That's what love is. It's literally to see the other flourish and to do well. And that is literally what love is. And, psychologists have all kinds of names for it. We refer to this a lot. The Gottmans, John Gottman, his wife, refer to it as positive sentiment override. It's just basically, do you love this person or not?
And what you were saying about the gospel, and you mentioned this in your sermon a couple weeks ago and say it all the time, we never move on from the gospel. We're never just going to be great at it and not need it anymore. We need the gospel all the time. And knowing that conflict is going to be part of our marriage. It doesn't have to be what defines us. You don't want conflict to be the thing that defines your marriage, but it's going to be there so we don't move on from the gospel. In fact, on those times when we're not in conflict, there's all of this. Is the word cash or cachet that you can pour into your account with one another, your relationship account, where you're pouring cachet, where you're pouring into this through the fun times that you have, your shared things, your family, storing up the things so that you are ready to then have the conflict. But
it's like a resource, right? It's like I already know. Becky and I, Carson mentioned this in one of the marriage gatherings that we had, that they basically have the same argument over and over. Becky and I feel like I'd have to think about it to get the clarity of what that actually is. But we have 2 or 3 rotating arguments, fights, whatever you want to call it. But you need enough cachet just to say, but I love her and I know she loves me and I'm for her. And even though we keep having the same frustrating conversation.
And we're called, I'm sorry, I'll say this last thing, that we are called to be devoted to one another and to love one another and love one another, and to be patient, kind, and humble. God calls us to do those things, and I've said it before because I've heard it so many times. He gives us the ability to do what he calls us to do. So when he's calling us to do these things for one another, for our spouses, he gives us the ability to do those things that we're called to do.
I think to wrap it up, what you have to say is that the gospel is the only thing that will actually change who you are and not just how you behave. It is not just behavior modification, but it is actually us becoming like Christ. It's God working in us. And it's the only thing that can actually get you through a hard season of marriage or even a hard marriage. And of course, we're not talking about if you have a spouse that is abusive or anything like that. But what I'm trying to say is we're not all guaranteed to have happy marriages. And the gospel is the only resource that there is that actually gives you the hope and the Spirit of God in you to love your spouse and not to treat them a certain way that is reactionary, to treat them a certain way based on how they treat you, but to treat other people based on the way that God treats you, right?
That's a great word.
So, great episode, guys. Thank you all. And excited to see just how in the life of our church some of this can come to bear. But it's been great to be with you guys. Thanks for being here.